Hey guys, welcome to the second episode of our podcast Center Stage. Today we're going to be talking about sexism. My name's Danielle, and today I'm going to be essentially moderating the conversation as well as talking about rape culture and how women face sexism in their jobs.
Hiya, I'm Pippa, and I'd like to create discussion over the different definitions of sexism, the patriarchy, intersectionality in sexism and feminism. It's whether it has a link to capitalism and a bit of anecdotal sexism. And I'll also be playing devil's advocate, so we keep it nice and balanced.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Gracie, and I'm going to be talking more about the double standard and how sexism affects women more than men.
Hi, I'm Sabrine, and I'll be discussing society and sexism.
I think that it would be good to start this discussion by kind of talking about the definitions of sexism. For example, what I found was that sexism refers to prejudice or discrimination based on sex or gender, but it's mainly evident against women and girls.
Yeah, it's worth saying that sexism entails misogyny and misandry. So, like you just said there, misogyny means discrimination against women, and misandry is discrimination against men. But I don't know if there's a term for discriminating against transgender people.
Transphobia.
Transgender people tend to conform to the binary sexes. No, not sexes, genders. So I guess it would be misogyny or misandry.
Yeah, I think so too. I think one thing that we can start off by asking is, who do you think sexism affects most and how? In regards to work and whatnot, 70% of people in national minimum wage jobs are women, and 30,000 women are sacked each year for being pregnant. So that's an example of discrimination against women in the workforce, and I think you guys might have other examples.
I'm not sure, but I think it's interesting to say who it affects more. It's the severity to which it affects them, because you could say more men commit suicide, but more women are sexually assaulted and more women are raped. It gets more casual sexism.
Yeah, I think sexism affects both genders in different ways. For example, I saw that men can be disadvantaged in regards to the criminal justice system as well as education, whereas women face more sexism in regards to work, as well as their day-to-day lives and sometimes in family because of domestic abuse and whatnot. I think also one of the questions that we got asked on our posts about sexism was if it's just women who face sexism and if men can face it too. And there was this one kind of study, I guess, done in which the sociologist said that men are facing a crisis of masculinity. So they're basically saying that there's been a loss of traditional male jobs, such as factory work. So men have been kind of disadvantaged in that area. So I was wondering if you guys thought if that's kind of relevant today.
Would you really say it's sexism against men if they lost their jobs due to society changing? Because I wouldn't really see it as discrimination against men, because that's a particular type of job, not just discriminating against men. And also I want to link back to the culture thing you mentioned. I believe women experience sexism more in culture than men, because I grew up in a culture where women are seen as just have to stay at home and cook.
It brings up the debate of cultural relativism, which I don't know you guys know or people listening knows is a cultural norm is considered acceptable in accordance with taking a subjective approach to that culture. So it's just sort of saying, yeah, but that's what that culture does. So do you think it's acceptable to dismiss sexism in different cultures? Is it just being their culture?
I don't think you should really dismiss it, because you know, society's changing, but then, you know, in third world countries, there's like, they believe that women should stay at home. They should just get married. The only purpose for women, or that's very strong opinion, but like they believe that women should get married off and then serve the
Yeah.
husband and have kids. That's like most cultures' beliefs and what women should do. And yeah, I don't really think that people should like disregard that fact and dismiss it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't think that it should be dismissed, because at the end of the day, like, women can bring so much to the table in regards to like society and helping us improve. So by just limiting them, especially those in the third world countries, to just like, you know, being in the house and stuff like that, that's part of the problem. And if you justify it by saying, oh, it's just like, oh, it's just part of their culture, like it's still, it doesn't really make any sense to me.
That raises a question, like, how much significance should like religion or culture play over the role of women and tradition?
Yeah, I think it is important, but I feel like it's also the question about how religion and culture tend to get mixed up, you know?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
when culture and religion get mixed up, that's when lines are blurred, and
Yeah.
where sexism kind of gets involved, and people use religion to justify sexism when really it's just part of their own culture, and that's where it's wrong.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Because there's different cultures within religion, like different interpretations and all that
Yeah, like
jazz.
there's different
Yeah.
sects. For example, in Islam, there's loads of different sects. One example is Shia, one example is like Sunni. So in each religion, there's always like varying opinions on different things.
Yeah, and varying interpretations over like the written word and stuff. Because I really like what you did in your story when someone was asking about whether you think there are inherent contradictions in Islam, and you basically said like, here's this quote and this is how I interpret it. So it just shows how people can interpret it in different ways.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's like important to just understand that it's not always just one way. Like,
Yeah,
they're there to be interpreted and for you to like understand
Critically think.
the actual meaning behind it, rather than for you to just follow along with culture. Because at the end of the day, if you're like a religious person, it's never going to be culture over religion, it's always going to be religion over culture. So when
Yeah.
those get blurred, that's when it becomes a problem.
yeah, I really like that.
I think another thing worth noting is kind of like rape culture. So I think
Yeah.
Sabrine, right?
Yes, a brain, yeah.
Sabrine, finally I got it
Yeah.
right. Okay. You were talking about how on social media you saw women sharing her
Mhm.
sexual assault story. So like,
Yeah.
can you talk some more about that?
Yeah, it was on actually TikTok, and basically this guy, he duetted a women's sexual assault story where she was sexually harassed in her workplace, and then he was duetting it, bear in mind, shirtless, and saying that basically,
Yeah.
look at what you're wearing. And it was like really disgusting, and like it just showed the double standards, because he was shirtless and he's continuing to say, oh, what you're wearing is what led to what actually happened to you. And I just wanted to say that it's not because of what you're wearing, because Muslim women and like other women, they cover up and they still get harassed. I know my friend where she walks home every day from school and she gets honked at like at least twice, and she's fully covered up wearing a headscarf, minding her own business, and men continue to say that it's because of what you're wearing. And it's just disgusting. Like, there's so many men who believe this, and
Yeah.
it's due to the person, like their mindset, why they're harassing. And
in a museum, but it was an exhibition of clothing and what women who face sexual assault and rape wore when it happened to them. And you saw that it was loads of different things, and it wasn't just like, you know, revealing clothing, which is what people say is what causes everything to happen. It was like pajamas and stuff like that. There was even like children's clothing, like
Yeah.
showing it doesn't just happen because of what you're wearing. It happens to even like people younger than you think, and by people who you're supposed to trust, for example, like by uncles and stuff like that. It's not just, oh, you know, you should be careful about what you wear in order to stop this, because there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah, and it feeds into like gender roles and stuff. It's like women are to like stay virgins until they're married, or they're to not be like sexually promiscuous or sexually liberal even.
Was it called the virgin dichotomy? I think I might be wrong. Where if women become whores and they sleep with other men, they become whores, and if when they're married, that's when they're like more powerful and like seen as angels. Whereas if they're sleeping outside of marriage, then they're seen as, you know, someone to be inferior to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like double standards in regards to that kind of thing, because if a woman was to do that, she would be labeled like a whore or a slut, for example. Whereas if a guy was to, it would be like, well, hey, look at you, we love to see it. And it's like, really? Like, come on, you're both doing the same thing. So why is one being like, you know, discriminated against just because, you know, it's a woman? Like, it doesn't really make any sense to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what second wave feminism advocates is that sort of sexual liberation and shamelessness. But there is this sort of competition within feminism where it's like you should be like innovative and you should like prove that you're like a boss and you're empowering as a woman by like going and accomplishing things and stuff. But then other women are like, well, if I want to like wear less or go out, do all these things, stay at home even, like I should be able to do that. It's my choice. So do you guys like assign to one of those thoughts, or do you think they can both match in harmony?
Me personally, I think they can match in harmony, but at the end of the day, it's all about kind of like choice. And as long as like, you know, the woman is doing it because she wants to, then I don't see a problem with it. But
Yeah.
I am like an advocate of, you know, you should do things that make you feel empowered and make you feel, you know, like happy. So it just depends on whether or not the woman is happy.
Yeah,
I think at least.
but is it so from the other side? Is it worth saying that women need to set a precedent for other women? Like they're leading the way; they need to set the example in mold society. So if women are choosing not to be innovative and prove that they have more to contribute to society, are they holding back the feminist movement and what first wave feminists fought for?
For them to be powerful, they don't need to like show they're powerful, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They don't need to be innovative. They don't need to be all this stuff. They can, as Danielle said, they can do whatever makes them feel empowered, because some women they feel empowerful, like writing or just observing, and some other women feel empowered by speaking up for what's right and like moving the movement. And it's just, I think it's just a human thing to just, you know, respect other people and, you know, hear what others are saying.
Yeah, I actually love that, and I actually find it really patronizing when people are like, you should be doing more and stuff, and it's like, just because I'm a woman, I shouldn't have to have such responsibility to propel it up. The point is we should be able to like live our lives irrespective of our gender roles and what people expect from us, because that's the same thing. It's attributing gender roles. Like we don't like being confined in the box to we have to be like submissive or whatever, and we'll get on to talking about those sort of definitions later. But you're assigning gender roles by saying you have to be innovative and you have to lead the way, like it's putting you in another box, and we just want to break through.
Yeah, when I was doing some research, I looked at kind of like sociological kind of like studies that kind of talked about sexism and gender norms. So there was this one sociologist that stood out, and they were called
Anne Oakley, right?
Basically, yeah. and she basically talked about how language is used by parents to reinforce the importance of gender. So, for example, calling a girl good girl or a boy a bad boy, as well as like learning acceptable behavior, which is called manipulation. So, for example, boys shouldn't cry. And I think the whole issue is we need to kind of like start educating that, you know, that's not all there is to it, and there's so much more to like being a human in general. Like, I don't think it should just be about like, oh, you know, you're a woman or you're a girl, you should do this, you should do that. Like, in general, just raise your kid to be a good human and not, you know, just make them submissive to gender norms.
We can like go on to gender roles and stuff now, because we've sort of started to like brush upon gender roles. So discrimination against women comes from the blurring of sex and gender. Sex is biological and gender is to do with the characteristics and attributes that make up one's identity. So what feminists argue is that such characteristics of femininity, which includes being domestic, submissive and sensitive, cannot be attributed to people based on biological characteristics. So I'll just put up the definition of feminine, which is having qualities or an appearance traditionally associated with women, especially delicacy or prettiness. So what do you guys think of that?
Like, you don't have to be feminine to be like a woman, if that makes sense. Like, you don't need to be submissive, you don't need to be sensitive, you don't need to be domestic in order to be considered a woman. Like, there's so much more to it than that. And I feel like when you kind of just limit us to that, that's when like you allow sexism to like thrive.
Yeah, and I guess you can sort of, we can reclaim the word because language changes constantly. And I think today, if the assumption of femininity being submissive, it would be reprimanded, because if someone was to say like femininity means being delicate or whatever, like today, a lot of people would say, well, that's not true. Like, my femininity is so much more than that. So in a way, we've reclaimed the word. But I think it raises the question of whether the definition of femininity should become more fluid, or should gender become more fluid. So you can make feminism a broader definition, or you can make gender broader, so have like multiple genders and like people identifying as non-binary or just people non-conforming. So what do you think should become more fluid, femininity or gender?
Gender.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I agree. Gender's already fluid. Like, people are identifying as non-binary, and I don't know the exact terms, but yeah.
I think gender has always been fluid, though. If you look back at like historical documents and stuff like that, or even looking back at people's diaries, people have always kind of been fluid with the idea of gender. It's never really been fixed, because wasn't there like the thing with pronouns as well, wasn't it that everyone was referred to with he, him pronouns before they created the pronoun she?
Okay, because I personally like the idea of reclaiming the term femininity, because I don't know, in sort of feminism talk and stuff, we can talk about how like our femininity makes us empowered, and my femininity to me means that I'm educated, or for someone else it could just mean that they're free. But I also do advocate gender being fluid as well, because people can identify as what they want. But I feel like if you make the binary female and male, people are more likely to be satisfied with what they get. What worries me about gender being like so rigid is like the feeling that transgender people get, that they need to get reconstructive surgery to like become completed as whatever gender they're going to. So absolutely fine, go ahead with the surgery, like whatever makes you feel who you truly are. But I don't know, I think if gender roles were less rigid, we could just say if someone trans said that they're a woman, they wouldn't have to undergo surgery, because we'd just go, well, yeah, obviously you're a woman if you say you're a woman, you know?
agree, especially in the with the trans community as well. There are people within the trans community that think that if you don't like go through with the surgery, you're not really trans. So
Yeah. And it's like if boys could take like the feminine, using the old definition before we've argued that we've reclaimed it, if boys could take the feminine trait of sensitivity over to their role as being a boy or being masculine, then they wouldn't have to convert to any different gender. They could just like embrace that as it is.
It's also about like the idea of like, you know, looking like a woman. It's kind of like, okay, so like what does a woman look like? Do you get what I mean? It's like there's like men have like an obsession of how women look, and they see women who do not fit their ideas of beauty as like inferior, and this therefore leads to you know, women feeling inferior and like people wanting to look a certain way, which is also another form of like sexism, because we shouldn't have to think that way. We should just like be able to, you know, embrace ourselves and feel empowered by how we look.
So I've been watching a lot of Nikki's Dragon recently, and I don't know if you guys know her, she's a trans YouTuber, and I think it's worth throwing out there, it's worth watching her videos just to gain some empathy from it, because being transgender is such like an individual matter and something that's really hard to relate to. So I don't know, if you struggle to see their point of view, I just think it's so good to watch, like even watching the videos about like her relationships and stuff, and what being transgender, like how significant that is just to her day-to-day life.
I think it's significant to note as well how people treat her compared to other people that don't pass as well as her, because she passes really well, but if you look at like maybe trans YouTubers that don't pass as well, they're not respected.
No, absolutely, because she did this video where she went on Omegle and just like told people that she was trans, and people were responding like, but you look so good. It's just like, what does that mean?
There was another YouTuber as well, Nikki, I think.
Oh yeah, Nikki.
No one knew she was transgender until she came out, and I think it was really cool, because you don't really, unless you feel comfortable, you don't really need to say that you are, and I think she was a good example of that.
No, for sure. And Nikki's Dragon says the only reason she talks about it is because she wants to help that one transgender person who's struggling with it. So and she shouldn't even have to do that. It's hard for her to put herself out there and receive all the hate that she does. But Nikki Tutorials, I think, embodies what it should be to be transgender. Like, just let her get on with it and do what she's good at.
I think it's also like a matter of like, you know, you can have your opinion, but keep it to yourself kind of thing as well, because if it doesn't like concern you, who are you to, you know, project your opinion, which might be offensive, onto someone else? And I think that's also plays a big role in kind of like sexism as well in general.
And it's worth mentioning the circumstances in which she came out, because she was being blackmailed, which is so, as if like it should be this big secret or whatever. It's like, no, it's just part of her private life. I can't think of another side to that, because I know I should be doing devil's advocate, but what is the other side to that? Like, I'm not going to say that transgender people aren't worthy or anything, so, because that's not even a logical argument. But
I was also going to say that I read somewhere that it's harder for trans women to come out as trans women than it is for people to come out as trans men, because people find like transitioning to a woman harder to conceptualize, or like because of sexism they see like trans women kind of like at the bottom of the hierarchy, because you're transitioning to a woman instead of a man. Like I ContraPoints, she's a YouTuber, she did a good video on it explaining that it's harder for trans women to come out.
I think that's a really good point. So why do you think that is?
I guess because women are not seen as like individuals that have free will and stuff like that. I guess because sexism is so prevalent and the patriarchy, it's easier for you to walk around as a man than it is as a woman, and to add being trans on top of it, it's like the prejudice is really amped up.
Yeah. And scrutiny of women in general, like just their appearance.
How does capitalism link to sexism, since that's the thing that you also looked at?
Oh yeah. So there's a strand of feminism called socialist feminism. Friedrich Engels in 1884, and you guys are probably familiar with that guy who's the one who worked in conjunction with Marx.
Mm.
He claimed that the move from matriarchal societies to patriarchal was due to capitalism. Women served capitalism because workers needed to be supported and looked after to carry out work, provide for the next generation of workers, act as a reserve army of labour, i.e. to be called upon when needed, and act like private property. So in a way, they act like private property by being like monogamous before marriage. So what do you guys think of that?
Yeah, didn't Parsons talk about like the warm bath theory, which is like men come home and their wives are there to like look after them so they can go back to work, and it kind of like contributes to society because they continue working?
It can be a bad thing because that can also lead to women just being housewives, and that only that being their role, you know what I mean? I feel like there has to be a kind of like balance.
Yeah. And I think it shows what shows that they don't perfectly complement each other is like all the people that have broke through, like all these powerful women, all these powerful feminists that have broken through, who've basically said like, I'm not a housewife, I've got more that I want to contribute. And that's why we have feminism, because there are those exceptions, and especially more so that society's moving to a place where it's like you choose what you want to do. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, 100%.
I also read something else yesterday that Engels said. He was like, he emphasizes that monogamy in class society has always meant in practice monogamy for the wife and covert polygamy for the husband. Like talking about that double standard again.
Yeah. So with gender roles and stuff, a lot of people say that they're reflective and they're natural in a way. So do you guys think in any sense gender roles are rightful, so it's okay to confine people to these boxes? Because like these stereotypes must have come from somewhere.
I don't think anyone or any sex, any gender should be confined to roles, because as you guys were saying before, women should look after their men when they come back from work. That is another human thing to do, to like cater for someone or like look after someone after they had a long day. I just think that society gets messed up between the role of women and the role of like a human. Like we don't have to do that. It's just that's a human thing to do, and we shouldn't really be confined to any roles we do. We should. I just think that people are so like greedy for power that we forget the power of love, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I found out that men tend to commit more crime than women, and there's like loads of different reasons for it. For example, like socialization, lack of social control, labeling from the police leading it to self-fulfilling prophecies, and how they're also more likely to join subcultures. So me personally, I think that education is like what's going to solve a lot of problems that we have in society, because when you start educating people on different things in a productive way, that's how you solve the issues. So my question is in regards to how sexism is faced by both men and women, how do you think we can kind of like tackle this issue?
So a lot of what you're saying with men going into crime and stuff, it's to do with like being the man and being more aggressive and mentally strong, all that kind of stuff. So I think just don't assign roles to people.
Yeah, I agree.
Also with men in crime, it's kind of not their fault, but it's like they are at the top of the hierarchy, right? We live in a patriarchal society. They've set it up like that on purpose. They've disadvantaged almost themselves because they've created such like rigid gender roles and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true as well.
It'd be interesting to know, do you think that side of capitalism being linked to gender roles and stuff and sexism, do you think that's been orchestrated by men?
I think so, yeah, but not consciously. I think they did it subconsciously and then they realised it disadvantages them.
Because of the economic system?
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes they can use the reason that men are disadvantaged in different sections like education and crime to dismiss the facts that, you know, sexism is mainly like faced by women, and use it as a reason to not talk about it, and kind of like uncover how it really is a big issue.
I agree.
Men feel entitled to, you know, objectify women and then do all that stuff basically, but then you can be sexist towards men because men can experience discrimination from the other sex too.
Yeah.
I think that's it really, guys. It's been fun. It's been a nice discussion. So thank you for listening, and yeah,